Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're breaking down the meticulous construction of James Cameron's 1997 epic, Titanic. We're going to figure out exactly how it became such an unprecedented cultural phenomenon. No fluff today, guys. We're getting right to the core of what made this cinematic titan tick, pulling all our insights directly from the historical and production records of the film. Let's get right into it.
So here's the million, or rather, $200 million question. How did a predicted megaflop become the biggest movie in history? Let's dive into this massive cinematic gamble and unravel the mystery. You know, right before its release, industry experts literally thought this movie was going to sink just like the real ship. Total disaster, right? But instead, it became an absolute juggernaut. So why? What exactly was the secret formula here?
Section 1. The intimate human core.
To really understand this film's wild success, we've got to look at the framing device first. Cameron introduces us to a modern-day 100-year-old Rose to instantly ground this massive, unimaginable tragedy into a single, highly relatable human perspective. And notice the stark ideological contrast between our two leads. On one hand, you have Rose DeWitt-Bukater. She's 17, a first-class passenger, but essentially, she's a prisoner. She's trapped in a forced engagement designed solely to save her family's fading wealth and status. She perfectly represents the suffocating constraints of high society. Then, on the other hand, you've got Jack Dawson, a completely penniless, free-spirited, third-class artist who, get this, literally won his ticket in a lucky poker game right before the ship left the dock. He represents pure freedom, living life totally on your own terms. So this isn't just a romance, it's a head-on collision of two entirely different worldviews. And then you throw in Rose's controlling fiancé, Cal Hockley, and boom, you have the perfect human antagonist to drive this forbidden romance. Cal is arrogant, he's incredibly wealthy, and he is completely dedicated to enforcing that rigid class divide. Now, while the iceberg is obviously the physical threat of the film, Cal is the emotional and societal threat. He makes the stakes deeply personal long before the ship is ever in actual danger. Section 2. From romance to terror. The true genius of this movie, honestly, is that it's essentially two entirely different films stitched flawlessly together. Cameron masterfully splits the timeline right down the middle. So Act 1 is the setup. Rose is overwhelmed, she contemplates suicide at the stern of the ship, and Jack talks her down, which sparks their friendship and eventually their romance. Then we hit the midpoint turning point. Just as Rose makes this monumental decision to abandon her wealthy life for Jack, the ship strikes the iceberg. The pacing immediately and violently shifts into Act 2, the sinking. Suddenly, we're plunged into a terrifying survival thriller, completely heightened by the fact that Cal frames Jack for stealing the diamond and locks him below deck as the freezing water is rising. And finally, Act 3, the climax. The ship splits, they're stranded in the freezing Atlantic. Jack makes the ultimate sacrifice so Rose can stay out of the water on that floating door panel, which allows her to survive and fulfill her promise to him, to live a long, adventurous life. It is an absolute masterclass in narrative escalation.
Moving on to Section 3, pushing production boundaries. Now, writing an incredible script is one thing, right? But figuring out how to visually capture the destruction of the most famous ocean liner in history, that's a completely different beast. The film cost a staggering $200 million. That made it the most expensive movie ever made at the time. And honestly, this massive number is exactly why those industry experts were so terrified. An investment this large in a historical romantic drama, it was completely unheard of. The studio was literally sweating bullets over every single cent. But here's the thing. That record-breaking budget was actually spent on some obsessive, boundary-pushing feats. James Cameron was so deeply fascinated by shipwrecks that he didn't just use stock footage. No way. He personally led expeditions to the real Titanic wreck, diving 2.5 miles down to the ocean floor. He even had to develop custom camera technology just to shoot the opening footage under all that intense pressure. And back on land, they literally constructed a custom 17 million-gallon water tank down in Mexico and built a 90% scale replica of the actual ship. The dedication to practical realism here is just mind-blowing.
Oh, and as a fun side note, because I absolutely love details like this, the hands you see sketching Rose in that iconic drawing scene, they actually belong to James Cameron himself, not Leonardo DiCaprio. Actually, scratch that. It's pretty well known by superfans now, but it's still a fantastic little Easter egg. It perfectly illustrates just how incredibly hands-on the director was with every single frame of this production.
But Cameron didn't just care about visual scale, you know? He grounded all this entertainment in sobering reality through a brilliant technique known as cinematic synchronization. Check this out. The 1912 scenes in the film have a total runtime of exactly 2 hours and 40 minutes. Why does that matter to us as viewers? Well, because that perfectly matches the exact amount of time it took the real Titanic to sink into the Atlantic. Subliminally, it aligns your viewing experience directly with the real-time historical tragedy. It's such an incredible, subtle touch that just ratchets up the tension. He further anchored this epic disaster by surrounding our fictional protagonists with incredibly accurate depictions of real historical figures. So while Jack and Rose are the fictional heartbeats of the story, they walk the decks alongside people who were actually there. Characters like the unsinkable Molly Brown and the ship's tragically doomed architect, Thomas Andrews. Blending this meticulous historical accuracy with a deeply emotional, fictional narrative, that is exactly what made the film resonate so powerfully with audiences around the globe. Finally, Section 4, an unprecedented cultural legacy.
All of this obsessive detail, the brilliant pacing, the emotional grounding, it all paid off big time, transforming those early predictions of financial doom into total triumph. Defying literally all industry experts, the film stayed at #1 at the box office for an astonishing 15 consecutive weeks. To put that into perspective, think about the modern movies we watch today. If a movie stays at #1 for 3 weeks, it's considered a massive, massive hit. So 15 weeks at the absolute top, that is almost incomprehensible by today's standards. It just completely shattered records across the board. In terms of the global box office, it became the first movie in the history of cinema to ever gross over $1 billion, eventually climbing to a staggering $2.2 billion. And critically, it was just as dominant. It tied the all-time record for Oscar wins, taking home 11 Academy Awards, including the big ones, Best Picture and Best Director. It wasn't just a popular movie, it was a towering artistic achievement. Which leaves us with this final thought to take away from this explainer. In our modern era of digital effects, where massive oceans and giant ships can just be fully generated on a computer screen, will the industry ever take a massive, practical, and deeply human gamble like this again? The sheer audacity to build a near full-scale ship, fill a 17 million-gallon tank, and dive to the bottom of the ocean for authenticity, is that just a relic of the past? Or will a filmmaker dare to push the boundaries of physical reality like James Cameron did back in 1997? Think about that the next time you sit down to watch a modern blockbuster. Thanks so much for joining me today, and keep exploring.